The Evil Dead franchise is one of the best horror franchises out there, and one which I certainly have become a fan of in the past year. A new entry into this franchise has been released titled Evil Dead Rise, which released recently in cinemas. I've only just got around to watching it and reviewing it, so without further ado, let's get into my ranking of all 5 Evil Dead movies. Controversially, in last place is Evil Dead 2013. I'd like to clarify that all of these films are good, especially for the horror genre. And I know it's controversial having this one in last place, but I still liked it, just to clarify. There are many remakes in the horror genre, most of them pointless, terrible, don't add anything. But this one wisely takes a new approach to what we got in the original, and isn't just a straight up remake. You know, it has new characters, new story elements. Yes, there are familiar ones and ones which they have copied over, but still, it does feel like a new experience to some extent, and my god, it's not afraid to get bloody. The gore and violence is the real standout in this film for me. While it doesn't do a lot wrong, I still don't love it. The real reason why I love the original so much, which we'll talk about later on in this video, is the atmosphere it creates. It's so unsettling and unique, and I think that comes from how little money that they had to make that film. You know, they had to get creative some ways. There are some aspects which aren't technically good filmmaking, but they just add to the creepiness. Also, the stop motion effects instead of special effects were creepy, and here you have a well-financed film with a big budget and some slick special effects and editing. It doesn't create that feeling inside of you like the original did. That's why I don't have too much love for this film, although I can appreciate that it is solid, especially for a remake. It doesn't stand out within the genre for me, and I'll probably forget it in a few years' time. Army of Darkness takes the Evil Dead franchise into unfamiliar territory where the first 2 films before it had taken place in the cabin in the woods. Naturally, the next place you can go is back in time, in the medieval times, you know, not weird at all. This is most certainly the most unique of the original trilogy, as how isn't it? It's in a completely different time and location, and you can't help but admire it for its craziness. This is the one in this video which I consider least to be horror, as it's more a slapstick comedy for the majority of it, and we have sprinkled of horror elements in there. Your enjoyment of this film will come down to what you like about the Evil Dead franchise. If it's strictly the horror stuff, then you probably won't enjoy this. If it's the slapstick comedy, you'll love this. Or if you're like me, you like a good mix of both, you'll be somewhere in the middle. I enjoyed this film for how weird it was, and I don't think it's on the level of the 2 films that came before it, hence why it's so far down on this list, but I still had a lot of fun with it. There are certain aspects which haven't aged too well, especially special effects, but I think that actually adds to the charm a bit. There are a lot of flaws you could pluck from it, but it's a lot of fun, and Bruce Campbell, you have to admire him for giving it his all in this role. So while there are some flaws, there is still a lot of fun to be had here, and can't help but admire the bizarreness of it. Evil Dead Rise marks the return of this franchise, and did so in horrific fashion. We're set back to the original's tone of that claustrophobic feeling of horror, where there's little you can do to escape. What I really admired about is the environment of this film. It swaps out the cabin in the woods for isolated apartments in a city, and while you still have that same atmosphere in the sense that you're kind of trapped in this small space, it also feels entirely different because of the environment itself and just the elements that play out in different scenes. While this film is a lot more on the horror side, you do get those Evil Dead 2 elements of the humor, which doesn't take you out of the film experience, especially if you know what the Deadites are like. They're sprinkled into these moments just to make them even creepier, whilst at the same time you can find them funny. Alyssa Sutherland steals the show. She is one of the main reasons for that nice blend of the 2 tones. She demonstrated a wide range of acting skills while feeling terrifying, hilarious, and also sympathetic. The atmosphere is unsettling, as well as the horrific elements, and of course, gore and violence. It may not be the most unique film on this list, but I still thought it was a great return to the franchise. I feel like I've already talked about this film on this list, because I mentioned my main love for this film is that atmosphere it creates. I mentioned also the small budget helps making that possible with not having the resources that other films on this list have had, and you have to get creative with certain things. On paper, you could highlight a lot of issues with this film, perhaps poor stunt coordination, poor acting, but what this film is able to generate surpasses that and can mask that up because of how brilliant it is, especially given how minuscule this budget is. On top of what I mentioned earlier with the stop motion, uncomfortable editing, you also have the use of color, which makes this film stick in your head, almost make you feel like you're having some kind of trip. The story is very, very simple, but the way it's executed is just so creepy, unique, and provides a tone that I don't think I've felt in any other horror film. In a way, Evil Dead 2 is pretty much a remake of the first in a sense, especially given that there's a whole new tone established amongst it with this slapstick comedy, which for some reason works really well. Most people, this is an easy first choice, but for me it was closer between this and the first one than others have, but nonetheless this is my #1 pick. Evil Dead 2 builds upon the original with that unsettling tone, but elevates it to new levels by introducing that comedy, which it's hard to explain, but increases how unsettled I was and freaked out. It's such an odd experience watching it, especially for the first time, where you feel half creeped out but also half entertained from hilarious moments. This film defines Sam Raimi as a director, how he can master the horror elements while also mastering slapstick comedy as well. The blend of the two here is odd but works really well. The film is bigger in the sense of course, its budget, but the stunt work is improved, the special effects are improved. It's a much slicker production, but not losing the magic from that first film. Whether you're a fan of the direction of this film or not, there is no question that you will not be bored with it, as it has so many things to love, and hence why it's my #1 pick. Let me know what your Evil Dead ranking is down below. I'm eager to see. It actually feels like I've done this video before, as I covered the first 3 Evil Dead movies in a Sam Raimi ranking last year, but it was nice to get around to watching the remake and of course the newly released one, as well as the Ash vs Evil Dead show, which I will have a ranking of in the coming days as well. So stay tuned for that. But anyways, thank you for watching and hope to see you in that video.